We always learn a lot talking football with Zach Smith. You can catch him right there on Twitter, Coach Zach Smith. Also, Menace to Sports. They upload every day. Check out the podcast Monday through Friday. Menace to Sports. Zach, what's going on today?
Not a whole lot. Mark, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well. And we're in the middle of spring football, of course. A lot of teams have wrapped it up, as did Ohio State last Saturday. Others we're still going to see. ESPN's putting the spotlight on USC. So you know that they've made their narrative. Okay, Lincoln Riley, USC, this is kind of a hot topic. So we're going to go out there. You know, they haven't touched the Pac-12 in forever in terms of showcasing somebody. So that's ESPN. It makes sense. It's the big coaching hire of the offseason. So, Zach, I'm going to throw two scenarios at you, and I know that you're going to be a lot more familiar with one, considering the success of the teams that you coached over the last 15 years or so. So let's say we're at the end of spring practice. The scenario one is, hey, yeah, we still have a lot of work to do, but man, the guys are buying in, they're focused, they get it. Maybe we had to implement a new offense and they're getting it. They're maybe ahead of the curve. We love the buy-in. These guys are mentally tough, you know, and we're in a good place. Versus scenario number two, these guys aren't necessarily as good, maybe athletically, as we thought they were. You know, they're good guys, but maybe they're not that mentally tough. Maybe they haven't picked it up as well as we thought. Also, they might be a little soft, not really have that alpha dog mentality. We only have a few of those guys, and we need like 25 of those guys. You know, what do we do? Where do we take it from here? You know, just, I know I'm not asking a specific question, but kind of two different scenarios coming out of spring practice.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, there could be a blanket statement about a team like you just mentioned, either side of the coin, but it also applies to position groups, right? Like you could feel great about your team, but you say, you know what, our receivers just aren't where they need to be yet, right? And so the good news is spring is like you have a ball of clay and you start to make the sculpture, but you're not putting the fine details on it yet, right? You still have time. You have the summer, and nowadays, different from when I coached, you also have a new recruiting season, right? You can address issues through the transfer portal. If you're just missing a tight end, man, if we just had a tight end that could block and you know, give us something in the throw game, you can go hit the portal and find that. So it's like free agency, where you identify issues in spring and you make a plan to fix them, whether that's through development, through coaching. You know, you have all summer to get a kid ready to play a game. Or is it, you know what, I don't know if we can get this kid ready to play. We might need to go find somebody. And now you have that crutch kind of, you have that option to go hit the portal and find a solution, a lot like Alabama did last year with Jamison Williams. And they did this year getting the receiver from Georgia. I mean, it's a way to go about it to kind of patch holes and fix weaknesses, right?
Got Zach Smith on the line, Menace to Sports. Check out his podcast, uploaded every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite audio platform. All right, if you were headed out to a spring game, and you know, we as fans, media, we've got a certain perspective on it. Fans seem to go overboard on what they see out there and don't realize it's 1 out of 15 sessions. You know, some of it's meaningless, some of it's meaningful. You know, if you were just headed out to a random spring football game and you're going to sit in the stands and watch the game, what would you try to take from that?
You know, I guess you can see some kids. We always said in a spring game specifically, you do it for two reasons. One is the fans. That's the number one reason why. And the other one is you can find something out, right? What is the difference in performance of a player from the Saturday before the spring game, right? Which is truly the culmination of spring. That last scrimmage a week before the spring game, that is the big moment, right? Behind closed doors, not in the public eye. That's where you really find some stuff out because you're running your full offense and full defense. You go to the spring game, the only thing you can really find out is who will be that same player, or even maybe take his game to another level when it's in front of the public eye, right? When you're in the stadium with crowds and the spotlight's on you, and it's not just a practice in an indoor facility now. You're in front of the public. You're on TV. You know, you have 60,000 fans watching. Will you make that same play? Because some kids pee down their legs and some kids elevate, right? And that's really all I look for in spring games. Other than that, spring games are like comparing a circus to the zoo, right? You don't go to the circus to see how an elephant actually is. it's just cool to see an elephant, walking on a ball. Like, that's not real life, but it's fun. It's entertaining, right? And that's how I kind of associate spring games compared to actual football.
Talking up college football with Zach Smith, Menace to Sports. Check him out. Podcast every day, Monday through Friday. All right, wide receiver. When we think of that position, we think speed, hands. That's obvious. Guy's got to catch the ball, and he's got to be athletic to get away from guys and create space. Catching the ball in space versus in traffic, I got to think there's a different evaluation there and so forth. So there's a few top-end qualities that are pretty obvious to all of us. Take us down the list, though, from a coaching perspective on what's maybe some things that we wouldn't necessarily take into consideration evaluating wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends on how in-depth you go with it, right? My number one thing that I look for in a receiver my entire career, and this is one of those like immeasurable qualities, right? And it's is a kid a dog or not, right? Like, when he goes on the field, is he an alpha? Like, does he talk trash a little bit? Like, you just feel his presence, he makes plays, he's got a swagger about him, because that's something it's hard to teach, right? The kid that goes out there and is a killer on the field, right? That was my number one thing, and it was more a feeling for me. There was no way for me to say, Mark, this kid is an 8.8 on the dog meter, right? It's just you felt it or you didn't. But outside of that, then you if you get down into the actual fundamental breakdowns of receivers, you mentioned two biggest ones are speed and hands, but maybe even a greater application of speed with separation, because a kid could be a 4.6 receiver, but if he can create separation with change of direction and acceleration, that's a kid you want, right? You could have a 4.4 kid that's not great. He's maybe tight in the hips, can't get in and out of cuts, and doesn't create separation, but he's really fast, right? So it's a combination of speed and looseness and acceleration that really give you that dynamic kid that can get open. And then when you talk about ball skills and hands, there's so many different angles that you have to catch a ball, right? It's deep balls over the shoulder. It's 90-degree breaks where the ball's coming perpendicular. It's angle breaks where it's coming, what I used to say, an obtuse or an acute angle, not to go all geometry on you, but you have to evaluate all those catches, because some kids are phenomenal at deep balls, right? They're phenomenal over the shoulder catches, but when they start moving sideways, depending on which hand is up, they struggle. So you have to really evaluate all the different catch angles and say, all right, how good is this kid's ball skills on all the catches, right? And then you can kind of rank your receivers in that fashion. I mean, Devin Smith was the best deep ball receiver I've ever seen, tracking a deep ball. He was just above average at catching those angular routes. So you just have to evaluate all of it.
Just on Twitter the other day, I saw somebody post they thought Devin Smith was the most underrated player in college football over the last 10 years and said, hey, I want to see your list, but I got Devin Smith.
Yeah, and you know what? There's no greater testament to that than Nick Saban, right? The greatest coach of our lifetime and a defensive guru, if you want to label him that, especially when it comes to secondary play. They literally, he said they've never done this for a receiver. They game planned in a passing scenario. If Devin Smith is on the field, they check their entire defense to try to get two guys on him. He said, we've never really had to do that. And they did. And Devin still torched him twice on deep balls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which brings to mind, I know you're an offensive guy, but obviously know the game better than almost all of us from both sides of the ball, because it brings to mind the Bill Belichick Patriots game against the Rams. Jared Goff, they hold him in today's football to 3 points in a Super Bowl.
Right.
That somebody like a Nick Saban or Bill Belichick can dial up a defense in an NFL game where 20 points is almost
right.
a given,
right?
Give up 3 in a Super Bowl. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, it's really high level defense is what it is. It's multiplicity, confusion. I mean, it all starts up front. You have to confuse the offensive line and confuse the quarterback. If you can do those two things, it could be a nightmare day for an offense. Receiver play is receiver play, right? You run your route. If it's man, you got to beat him. If it's zone, you have to find the zone. It's not that complicated, right? You got to confuse the offensive line and confuse the quarterback and attack him. You got to shoot bullets from all angles. And if you do that successfully, I mean, it's hard to do with how smart offensive coaches are now and how well-trained quarterbacks are, especially in the NFL. But if you can find a way to do that, and present things that quarterback has not seen on film and confuse him and rattle him and get him off his game, then you got a chance to be dominant. Now, 3 points in a Super Bowl, that's crazy. I mean, that we might never see that again. But that's how you do it. You got to confuse the quarterback and the offensive line, and you got to be just all over the place, multiple.
Zach, when we think of play calling, and again, I'm going from fans and media perspective, we think, well, the play calling is all about the quarterback and the playmakers on the outside, and at running back, that the offensive coordinator is thinking play to their strengths, get these guys in space, do whatever we do well, protect the quarterback, let him be a gunslinger, whatever, all that. How much is the offensive line? I think it's just underrated what the offensive line is, and obviously the chemistry of the offensive line is just ridiculous. It's got to be the most cohesive unit on the field to be successful. But how much is the play calling or a scheme drawn up to say, we've got to either go with the enhancement of how good our offensive line is or kind of protect these guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's huge, right? Play calling is far more personnel driven than people give it credit for, right? Like what is your right tackle good at? What is your right guard at? We back in the day, early days at Florida, we used to run power, but only one way, because only one of our guards was a good puller. The other one couldn't move. So we had to only run it one way, and we had to find ways to then complement it. Otherwise, everyone just knew we ran power to the right. So not only is it personnel driven, but based on what your offensive line is good at, what is good against their defense, but also who do they have, right? We made a decision when we were at Florida that we were going to flex our tight end out to the boundary. And if Patrick Peterson was over there, the quarterback just built a wall. He was not to throw it over there. Don't even look over there. But if Patrick Peterson wasn't over there, then you take your one-on-one matchup, right? It's so personnel driven that it's not just like, oh, here's the defense, what's a good play against it? It's like, all right, what are our kids good at? And who's on defense for them? Who can we attack? And who do we want to avoid entirely? I promise you this much. I'm not running the ball at Aaron Donald ever. Right? You got to find a way to run it elsewhere. So it's very personnel driven, and everything is offensive line centric. If you want to be good on offense, you have to make sure you're in a protection that your offensive line is capable of, being good at. And then you really rely on the quarterback more than people know, because they could come out in a different defense that this play's not good against. And you have to have him trained and coached up where he'll switch the play because he knows this play's not good against this defense or this alignment. And so the quarterback really is your fixer. You call a play, and if it's not a good play, you're like, hey man, get me out of this one. Like, get me into something good.
Always great stuff with Zach Smith. You can catch him every day, Monday through Friday, Menace to Sports. Zach, I always learn a lot. Always appreciate the conversation.
Well, Dad, thanks for having me on. I really enjoy it too.